Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of For the Love of Film, the series where I talk to a variety of different people about their love of film and what sparked that love in the first place. And today I am joined by Hugh Brown. Hugh, why don't you tell everyone what it is you do and who you are?
Hello. Yes, my name is Hugh Brown. I am a cinema programmer from Tunbridge Wells. I'm a graduate of the University of Brighton, which is how I first met Aaron. We were in different courses, but we worked together on a couple of projects. And yeah, we got talking again around London Film Fest last year, didn't we?
Mm.
But yes, so since 2023, I've been the cinema programmer at Trinity Theatre in Tunbridge Wells, where I started in the marketing department. I'll elaborate on this a little bit later. I've been a cinephile for as long as I can remember. Again, this will come up later, but from the age of 8 is kind of where that journey sort of started, where I knew that I wanted to be in this industry somehow. And I can only describe the job I do now as the dream job I never knew I needed. Um, and yeah, I think any excuse to sit down and talk about this love that I have, be it on a podcast or be it when I'm info dumping on someone in a pub after a few drinks. Yeah, it's been my passion. Like it still is. Love talking about it. Really excited to be on the podcast today.
Yeah, because I think you're the first. I might be wrong because I've done too many of these, but I think you might be the first guest I've had where I've known the person before. Like a lot of the people I've had have been either other writers that I know through screenings or filmmakers that I've met through screenings. But I think you might be the first person that I've had where I've actually known them for a while beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, you did digital film, whereas I did the most convoluted titled course in the world, television and digital media production, but it still
Yeah.
incorporated film elements, and hence why we ended up having some of the same lecturers. Um, yeah, and our campus doesn't exist anymore.
I know. It's such a shame. It's such a shame going past it and seeing. I don't even know what it is now. But what I wonder is what happened to all the equipment. Is it must have
Yeah,
or something.
I think so. I think there were two main buildings. One of the buildings I think is now a hotel, which kind of baffles because I think it was the Havelock building that's been turned into a hotel, and I think
Yeah.
knowing the inside of that building, I'm like, how do you fit bedrooms in there? Because I don't get how that would work. Priory building is still it's still no one's inhabiting it. It's just empty still, which is quite sad. So I'm going to start things off quite simple with a really easy question to begin with, and that is, what is the most recent film you've seen that you absolutely loved? It can be an old release, it can be a new release. Just what's the first thing that pops to mind?
Well, before we started recording, we were kind of talking about sort of coming to the table with more than one answer, which I'm sorry to say, but I'm going to do for the first question.
No, that's
I,
absolutely fine.
I have two. Uh, I'm just fair warning for a lot of my deep dives into film related questions. I will be parroting a lot of my Letterboxd reviews. So for anyone that hears this and then looks at my and it's just, oh, he just said exactly the same thing on Letterboxd. I'm just going to come clean with that now. That's exactly what I do because, yeah. So the first film that I saw recently that I absolutely loved was Challenges.
Mm, yeah,
Did you see it?
yeah. I missed it in the cinema, but as soon as it became available to rent on Amazon, I was like, I'm watching this because everyone's not shut the hell up about it. I need to give this a go, and I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, the internet buzz was crazy about it, wasn't it? Which
Mm,
I sort of love that kind of Barbenheimer thing where
mm.
somehow it just like it was the image of what's the actor's name? Josh O'Connor with the banana.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That one shot, that one shot, and then the churro scene went viral as well.
Oh my god, the thing is I love churros. The thing is I saw that picture on the internet and I thought, oh, is that just them mucking about on the set? But then it's like,
Mm,
oh no, they actually do eat churros in this film. And that scene says so much about their relationship. It's the hilarious
mm.
thing. I must confess, me and Charlie, for those listening, it's my partner, Charlie. We did recreate the banana image, but that is not going to be shown in public.
Yeah,
That's
don't
our,
worry, it will not be inserted right at this moment.
yeah, that's so no, to summarize, what I love most about Challenges is I think the writing was just so tight. I loved the
Mm,
structure of it. it's almost like afterwards I should have expected it to have been written like this, but the entire structure of the plot mirrors the tennis game at the climax.
Yep.
And I know it's doing that. It's very Social Network. I think of all the comparisons, I'd say that one, just in terms of how tight everything is and
Mm,
how you have one major plot point inserted into the rest of the story. In
mm,
Social Network, it was the depositions that come through every once in a while in the midst of Mark Zuckerberg inventing Facebook and so on and so forth.
yep.
And here you have the whole tennis game that serves as the chronological end being inserted, and with each sort of plot point, it kind of mirrors a stage in the tennis game at the end. So
Mm,
in like the first act and a half, Josh O'Connor is in the lead, I think. And then eventually the game changes and Mike Faced becomes the love interest for
Zendaya.
Zendaya's character. And then you cut back to the match and Josh O'Connor is on a losing streak. I just loved the way that they sort of threaded that in.
Mm,
And it was just really smart. I think I'd love to have been in the room where I can't remember the writer's name. I really should have taken a note, but where he was kind of mind mapping this and bullet pointing it, it would have been really,
mm,
really interesting. Off topic, but he is the wife of Celine Song, who wrote and directed Past Lives.
mm.
I th-
Yeah,
yeah,
I think when I found that out, I was like, plus he's also, I don't know if anyone remembers this or if you remember it, but there was that really bizarre potion seller meme from like way back in the day where it's a guy with like an effect on his webcam and he's like, "Do you have any potions for me, potion seller?" I do. That's him. And I'm like, the fact that the guy from the meme that went viral like back in 2012 wrote Challengers of all films and he's with Celine Song. I'm just like, that is the weirdest that's the weirdest triangle of information I think I've ever found
it's
out.
utterly bizarre. If my memory serves me right, I think the script was on the blacklist for a number of years before it got made, and then
Yeah.
I don't know what interested Luca. I can't pronounce his last name.
Guadagnino.
Guadagnino. I'm not really sure. I mean, maybe I should know. Well, it's interesting that he, of all people, chose to direct this, considering
Mm,
what his filmography looked like before Challenges. In a way, you can see, oh yeah, it makes perfect sense he made this, but in a way, it's like, oh no, this is kind of a weird one. This is
mm,
I keep going back to Social Network, but it
mm.
almost feels like a Fincher could have taken it on, especially with the. It's another favorite point of mine is Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross are always going to be good.
Yes.
But
Yep.
yes,
Yep.
yes, like I don't really think there's any more that needs to be said about that.
Yep.
Love the score, really great, really helps set the mood and the scene. Love the editing as well. This really,
Mm,
yeah, of course. There are scenes where the camera is like underneath the character's feet while they're playing the tennis,
yeah.
and then the shots of the ball where the camera is on the ball. Just really, really
Mm,
great innovative filmmaking, like using the
mm.
game of tennis to uh, infused with the camera work. I just think that's so fun.
Yeah, I totally agree. To be honest, that whole comparison between the social network, I hadn't really twigged that until you mentioned it. And the more you mention it, I'm like, actually, yeah, that is. There's a lot of, especially in the way the dialogue just kind of flows out of the characters' mouths, and the way the whole structure of the film is played out. It is very. Plus, obviously, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross did the score for both, but it
Mm,
I do I'd never really thought of that, but now that you mentioned it, I'm like, oh shit, yeah, that is that is pretty cool. Plus, I think because I was a bit hesitant going into it, one because it had been overhyped so much, and I'm like, sometimes when a film gets that much hype, it can be a bit of a letdown. Plus, I wasn't particularly blown away by Guadagnino's last film, Bones and All. I thought it was
mm,
fine. I thought it was good when I was watching it, but I've not had any reason to want to revisit it since, um, which is a shame because I love Call Me by Your Name. But then
yeah.
I felt a bit lukewarm about that, so I was like, I hope Challengers kind of revitalizes his filmmaking, and you can tell by watching the film and what he does with the camera that it feels like he's been a bit more reinvigorated behind the camera.
On the other hand, my second pick,
Hmm.
Wings of Desire.
Okay, that's a one that's oh, what's his name? Vim Vendors, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, I keep meaning to watch that
Have
because
you not seen it?
the only film of his I've seen is Paris, Texas, which I adore.
And I haven't seen Paris, Texas. I'm expecting a copy from a relative as a very late birthday present, but I don't know if it's just I don't want to go and buy it and then for it to suddenly arrive in the post and I'll be like, ah, okay. Um,
I can say now it is brilliant. It subverts what you think it's going to be, because I went into it expecting one thing, and it becomes a much more slower, more melancholic, like retrospective film in hindsight. And I was like, when I knew where it was going, I was like, okay, I'm on board with this. And then it's so well done. It's so
Oh, I
well
gotta
done.
get on it. I gotta get on it. We'll have to do it. Well, they're re-releasing it in 4K now.
Mm.
Again, this is something that's going to come up when we talk about programming. Um, but basically, me and Charlie were in Berlin about a month ago. Have you been to
Yeah.
Berlin?
No. Oh wait, no, I have actually. I can't believe I forgot about that. Year 10 school trip. I have been to Berlin.
Oh,
It's
see,
been
oh,
so
okay.
long ago.
It's it's a fascinating city. There's so much history when you go there. Just the ground that you're standing on, so much has happened upon that soil that it's
Mm.
surreal.
Yeah.
Wings of Desire is super interesting because we bought it months ago on Blu-ray when we were in Wales, and we just haven't had a second to sit down and watch it. But
Yeah.
we returned from that trip and we're like, oh yeah, we've got to watch some like German films or films set in Berlin now. Wings
Mm.
of Desire was the first one. It's very interesting because Wim Wenders made it not long before the Berlin Wall came down. So I think it came out in 1987 or 8 or 9,
Yeah.
and the Berlin Wall came down in 1989
Mm.
or 1990. I can't quite remember. Um, but his end game, I think, was to really get inside the German mindset in the
Mm.
closing days of kind of the wall being up, even though he didn't know that the wall was imminently going to come down,
Yeah.
technically. And that's what made it really fascinating for me. There's kind of this theme of escape, and the wall plays a part in the plot at one point. So,
Mm.
a really, really interesting sort of dreamlike fantasia of, you know, you can tell that I'm repeating myself a bit here, but yeah, totally made by a German guy or a Berliner.
Mm.
Just the themes are so topical for the time, and it starts off and it's quite sort of artistic, and you know the premise is it's for those who haven't seen it, it's about a pair of angels, and the concept is there are angels all over Berlin just watching humanity going about its daily life rather. Some are in the east, some are in the west of Berlin. Like they jump between the two, just sort of seeing all the goings on. For any Columbo fans out there, Peter Falk is playing himself, and he's making a film in Berlin. So at one point, the angels are watching him doing his thing,
Okay.
and Bruno Ganz's character really wants to be a human. He wants to
Mm.
feel things that these human beings feel. He wants to get a taste of their tiny little lives, what it feels like to buy a nice hot cup of coffee or
Yeah.
some food or enjoy a book. And
Mm.
he sees this woman and starts, in a non-creepy way, like observing her while she's like an acrobat.
Yeah.
And he's just so amazed by the art that she performs, and she has angel wings in her performance, which,
Mm.
you know, nice bit of symbolic imagery there. So yeah, for the first half, it's quite artistic, and then at the beginning of the second act, it kind of takes a really charming sort of light-hearted turn, and I won't really say why because it will kind of spoil it.
Mm.
But in that regard, it kind of wasn't the film we were expecting to watch. I
Mm.
was almost anticipating it to be a lot more sort of solemn and melancholic all the way through. But it was really nice it took that turn.
Mm.
I will say there is a surprise Nick Cave in there.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I'll let you speculate on that.
Yeah, I mean, I was already planning to watch it, but you've sold me with Peter Falk and Nick Cave alone. On top of the many other reasons why I wanted to watch it.
What's so
Um,
funny is just the other night, this is a film that I liked objectively. We watched recently, but I'm never
mhm.
going to watch it again,
Yeah.
or at least not for a while. It was A Woman Under the Influence by John Cassavetes, which Peter
Right.
Falk is also in, and he plays a bastard.
Okay.
So
That's hard for
that,
me to believe because I've only really seen him in Columbo and Princess Bride, because I forget
yeah.
he's always in that. So I just want to dive into the film programming that you do as a job, and I was just interested, how did you get into that in the first place, and just how do you approach that when you do program a film?
Well, so when I first joined Trinity, I was in the marketing department, and I still am. And that's really cool and everything. There's a lot of cross pollination between the two sides of my work.
Hmm.
The cinema programmer that was there when I started eventually left, and the acting CEO at the time took
Hmm.
over the programming job alongside some other responsibilities.
Yeah.
around the start of the new year in 2023, that CEO left and a new one came in.
Mm.
And this new CEO had, this is a very convoluted story. I'm
Yeah,
like, this is
it's fine.
a very abbreviation of the whole thing. But the CEO who stepped up to become the new, oh my gosh, CEO number two, we'll call him that.
Yeah.
We'd got talking a couple of months prior when he first joined in another capacity, and we discovered we both really enjoyed films and we liked talking about it. That was often like a good conversation starter. So a film programming position was technically available because CEO one had left. CEO two said, join me on X date for a meeting
Yeah.
and we'll talk about something. So I was like, okay. And I think I kind of knew what was going to happen, but I didn't want to assume. But he said, you seem like you really know what you're talking about. Do you want to have a shot at handling the film program? To which I said, yes, absolutely. Like, sign me up. Where do I sign up?
Yeah.
The programmer who left in 2022 did leave us a big like spreadsheet of all the contacts and all the information that we needed, just marketing capacity, just in case we needed to get in touch with them
Yeah.
for whatever reason. So that kind of formed the bedrock of starting to book some films in. What was really interesting is when I first started, we had a week where that was going to be filmed with a show that was eventually cancelled.
Yeah.
So, oh, we've got a week free. Let's put some movies in there. So this was March in 2023.
Yeah.
CEO one by this point had programmed a sizable spring season. So we had things like Tar, which he booked. Things like Till was one of them, and a couple others. But the first film I ever booked was All Quiet on the Western Front because Altitude were handling that for a theatrical release, even though it was on Netflix. And obviously, awards season was happening around this point. So, yeah, I thought that was a good place to start. And yeah, I've been doing it ever since. I think I'm still learning things on the job because I'm doing it, but I obviously haven't had like a training course or anything like that to say this is everything you need to know. But there are some resources that are available that I am reading into. So yeah, I'm still absorbing information. But for the most part, in terms of booking the films in and getting them into the projector, that's kind of down to a T. It's really fun. It's really fun to deep dive on the internet to try and find a distributor for something that you've heard about. At the moment, a lot of it, because film festival season is happening, is I'm sort of waiting for titles that I want to get distributors. So I can then reach them and say, hey, I've seen you've got this. Can we have it? Honestly, there's a meme of like a mailman opening a letterbox and SpongeBob's head is inside. And the mailman's like, that's basically me in a nutshell, film programming. But yeah, in terms of how I structure the program, there's a few different ways I go about it. The main thing is just paying attention to what sells. So you can very easily run a report of films that we've had in the past year, and you can see the reoccurring patterns. So for our audience, things that are really British and homegrown will sell out pretty quickly. If Judi Dench is doing a drama about, respected British actor gets their groove back, that's going to sell out. If Ian McKellen is doing British actor gets their groove back, that's going to sell out. Downton Abbey, for example, we had like 3 screenings of it before I started programming it in, and they sell that every single time.
Oh wow!
What's kind of strange is that's been difficult lately to find titles of that sort because they're kind of in at the moment, and I think a lot of that is due to the strikes and just a kind of a lack of fruitful soil for homegrown British cinema to kind of grow. But I think that's kind of shifting because Ian McKellen is doing The Critic later this year, which we have booked in, so we are going to be showing that. And, that kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, just keeping an eye on trends, what's doing well for us, and looking for titles of that nature. There is also, I use the word cross-pollination a lot. So we're a multi-arts venue, so we do films, but we also do theatre and we do music and we do comedy. So we kind of use those databases to hopefully build new cinema audiences. Recently we screened Inside Out 2. Children's cinema is a bit of we're still developing our audience for that, but Inside Out 2 did really well, and that was utilizing people who have come to see children's shows, sort of contacting them, letting them know this is on. I think it's always fun to try and develop new audiences, and sometimes it pays off, and then sometimes, you know, if you figure out it's not working, then it's like, okay, maybe we need to avoid programming these in the future. You sometimes have to be a bit ruthless and think, although this film looks really, really good, it
Mm,
probably isn't quite for our audience, you know, which I'm
yeah.
trying to think of an example of something that I didn't. Well, something like The Substance, which is about to drop out on Mubi, and obviously
Yeah.
that's getting Cannes buzz at the moment, but that's really not for us.
Mm,
I think we kind of we'd be sort of wasted trying to put that in. Same with kind of the Deadpools and Wolverines of the
mm,
world, is there's just really no point because people will not come and see them
yeah.
in our cinema. It's just not for our audience.
I also think with something like Deadpool and Wolverine, anyone who like really wanted to watch it will have already seen it in like the first week or so of it being out to avoid spoilers. So by the time you
Yeah,
get to like, I'm probably now like where it's already been out for like over a month, you're kind of just gonna be what's the term? You're gonna kind of just be playing catch up a little bit. Whereas if you put something that everyone's going to want to see, like those British films, like Inside Out 2, there's more of an audience for that. I can imagine.
yeah, and sort of the end game is to get to a stage where, regardless of what it is,
Mm,
people wait till it comes to us to go and see it. Because
mm,
you've sort of brought up a point that I forgot to mention is because we're a multi arts venue, we can't screen something upon release date for 3 weeks and then move on to another one because we've just got too much going on. So
yeah.
we can only get films in for a single day, which is kind of fun because then you can make it more of an event.
Mm,
And in some ways, it kind of works in our favor. So we screened A Haunting in Venice last year. That came out in September or August on general release, but we screened it on Halloween,
yeah.
around the time of Halloween, which obviously is a bit more seasonal. And we kind of, and we're doing the same thing with Beetlejuice.
Mm,
So we're marketing that as our Halloween screening. We're hopefully going to get some like Beetlejuice treats in the cafe and bar. So
mm,
yeah, sort of. Although, as you say, yeah, we're screening it months after general release when most people have seen it. We kind of try to think of these extra incentives to get
mm,
people to come to us anyway. Like, for example, I think Barbie, we did a
mm,
similar thing where the kitchen and bar were obviously dressing up in Barbie outfits because, of course, why would you not?
yeah.
Um, Barbie was an interesting one because we actually had a couple of issues with
Mm,
getting the film loaded into the projector with that one. We screened it last year and then we screened it again around the time the BAFTAs happened, and we had a problem with that screening as well. But
okay.
luckily, we managed to sort it. So Barbie is kind of the cursed film in our building.
Oh God.
What else for sure was the whole case where I
Mm,
fixed it like half an hour before the film kicked off.
oh
So
God.
obviously, doing the booking part is one thing, but managing the projector as well as a whole other
Yeah.
beast entirely. But it is fun because part of the job is building the playlists. So
Yeah.
oh, we're going to show Kinds of Kindness. I'm going to put the trailer for Prima Facie in front of it and
Mm,
Megalopolis and this film and this film. Once we have a trailer for our Christmas Panto, then that will obviously go in there.
yeah.
Um, Rewinding back a little bit, so I've kind of mentioned, you know, if something isn't working, then we won't show it.
Yeah.
We try to throw curveballs in there every once in a while just to sort of test the water and
Mm,
kind of see what's happening. We're trying it next Sunday because we're going to show I Saw the TV Glow.
okay. Okay.
And I think on paper, yeah, that's not a huge Trinity film, but the U Theatre actually requested it because they'd heard it
Mm,
was really, really good. So if they come and see it and tell their friends, then hopefully something can kind of grow from that.
mm,
There's one exception to these sorts of rules, though, and that's award season, which is
yeah.
my favorite time to program. And I've only done it once. Last year was really great because,
Mm,
not last year, sorry, earlier this year was really great because we managed to show all of the Best Picture nominees,
okay.
like
That's cool.
most of them before the Oscars, but some after the Oscars had happened. Like the
Yeah.
last one we did was The Zone of Interest, I think, which sold
Mm,
really, really well. Um, I
mm,
already have a rough idea of what we're going to show in 2025, just based on what kind of the film festivals are
yeah.
saying, sort of early speculation.
Mm,
But in that respect, it doesn't really matter what it is. If it's got BAFTA nominations or Oscar nominations, people will want to go and see it
yeah.
because their cinema loves them. They want to know, like, oh yeah, this is what's winning all the awards. Like this
Mm,
is, you know, in 20 years' time, I can say, oh yeah, I saw this when it came out around the time the Oscars were happening. Um, and all bets are kind of off. As I say, because if it's got an Oscar nomination attached to it, then yeah, people
yeah.
will come regardless.
I
So that's
also,
really fun.
I also feel like around the Oscars time because, and this is where it becomes a bit tricky in terms of what they nominate. I feel like a lot of the films they pick. are technically, like, for example, half of the films that were nominated for the 2024 Oscars were technically 2023 releases if you saw them at a film festival, which means a lot of the general public might not have seen them by the time they've got all these nominations, and you get tons of people going, I've not heard of this film. How comes it's nominated for like Best Picture, even though I've never heard of it until 5 minutes ago?
Come and
So
see it here and find out.
exactly. So I suppose there's like a beauty to that timing. So you can almost kind of fill in that gap. Like, you haven't seen these films, come to us because you can watch all of them with us before the event happens.
Yeah, yeah, that is literally it.
What would you say? I know you've listed some of them already, but what would you say, like, just firing them off, some of like the most memorable ones or some of the best ones you've programmed, or like in terms of how the reception turned out?
That's a really good question. I like that. Well, All Quiet on the Western Front being the first one I did, and that sold very well. It was amazing seeing it on the big screen. It's
Mm,
one of those situations where I can't believe it's on Netflix and not
yeah.
being like projected in IMAX like 24/7 because it's
Mm,
so grand in scope.
yeah.
Court of the Crimson King was another really fun one just because of kind of my personal connection to it, and also everyone who came to see it that night was just laughing all the way through.
Mm,
So then the screening I went to when I first saw it, which was a few months prior, actually the audience was quite quiet.
yeah.
I really like there seemed to be more of a sort of enjoyment out of it.
Mm,
Barbie and Oppenheimer kind of
yeah.
speaks for itself because Barbenheimer was still, very much doing,
Yeah.
in the public eye, as it were. Seeing Rye Lane was really fun as well, and that was
Mm,
Charlie's favorite film of last year because Rye Lane is so fun.
yeah.
Flashing forward to October of last year, Stop Making Sense for sure. That
Mm,
was definitely a highlight that month. In terms of this year, I think just all the award season stuff we did, I'm just glad that it went down really well. It sold well. Killers of the
mm,
Flower Moon selling really well. Maestro being projected in 7.1 surround sound was really memorable and really great.
yeah.
Seeing the zone of interest in my theatre was like really intense, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's really difficult picking my favorites for sure. Yeah, there's been so many. I should have got my cinema leaflets out really, so I
Mm,
could refresh myself on what we've done.
mm,
But yeah, off the top of my head, those are definitely the main ones that I remember and that I was really excited for.
yeah. Because I can imagine, because again, you're trying to please so many different types of audiences. One screening might have a different effect than another one, and you might have more of a fondness for one. Because I know I saw clips of people attending the re-release of Stop Making Sense, like in different parts of the world and the country, and they were treating it like a mini concert.
Yeah,
And I think people did the same thing with the Eras Tour film last year as
yeah,
well. So I can imagine, like, 1 minute you've got that, and then the next you've got like a family film, and it's more, it's just nice seeing families, young and old, together. And then you've got, I'm glad to hear that the Rye Lane one went really well, because that's another one that just kind of went straight onto Disney Plus, and I'm like, where's the cinema release? Why is it not
yeah,
in
yeah.
cinemas?
What was fun about that one is there are a lot of sort of friends night out kind of groups in that
Mm,
screening too. I think people obviously understood it was a rom-com and came along with mates to just have a laugh, which was really nice and it's
mm.
incredibly funny. Like the whole cinema was in hysterics, almost as much as the holdovers. That was one that went down really well in terms of getting the laughs out of people.
So I want to just deviate now from your job to just your general taste in film, just so we can get a sense of what it is you do and don't like. Um, and I'm just, if you can go back as far as you can remember, what was the first film you recall that really sparked your love for cinema in the first place, and why?
Yeah, I think I said when we started that this would come up.
Mm,
Well, it's funny. I joke and I say that the first piece of media I ever consumed in my life was Thomas the Tank Engine, because apparently I used to love that when I was like 3. Um, when I was sort of 8 years old, like in primary school, that's definitely where like Star Wars and
yeah.
Lord of the Rings and the big franchises were kind of in my radar. That's what I was consuming. The
Mm,
occasional sort of movie on its own came up. There's lots from my childhood I still am really fond of. But I remember getting a copy of Peter Jackson's King Kong, which I
mm,
was one of the a generation of children dragging their mothers to go and see that in the cinema because it was King Kong and it was awesome.
Yeah.
But in my copy of the DVD, there was a little leaflet of similar kinds of movies that are out on DVD. You know, it was like, oh yeah, go buy these for like King Kong.
Yeah.
One of these DVDs had a picture of a shark on the front, and you can
Okay.
kind of see where this is going.
Yeah.
And I was like, what's this? What's this? And then a couple of my friends were like, oh yeah, it's this movie called Jaws. It's about a shark. So I was like,
Mm.
okay. I borrowed a VHS copy. That's how long ago it was from a friend. So when I was 8 years old, I watched Jaws for the first time, just in my bedroom. Lights were off. I'm not sure how late at night it was, but a lot of the time I'd just be, my bedtimes wouldn't really be regulated. I'd kind of just be watching stuff and just getting to bed on my own steam.
Mm.
And yeah, on that night, Jaws came on. And I didn't really know it at the time, but that was sort of the point of divergence, if you will, in my life, where I sort of subconsciously or otherwise realized that, whoa, actually, this is such a powerful medium. This is literally has changed my worldview. It did, because since I've seen Jaws, I've been scared to go in the ocean. Like, there's always some unconscious feeling that I remember once when I was in Spain, I was swimming out to sea towards the buoys and then swimming backwards. And I kept looking behind me and I could see the buoy, but for an instant, it looked like a dark shape. And I was like, Chuck! Just because of God, the scene in Jaws that I think really sort of tipped the boat, as it were. It was when Alex Kittner, the little boy, gets killed on the beach. It was so disturbing and shit terrifying.
That's the one where it does the dolly zoom on Roy Scheider, isn't it?
Yeah, and the dolly zoom.
Yeah.
Every time that zoom comes on, I have to lean into the screen and make the noise. But yeah, I think ever since from the moment I saw Jaws, I think from then I was more driven to kind of seek out new stuff, and I understood just the power of what it was I was dealing with. And I watched Jaws a lot back then as well. Like it was also the first instance where I kept revisiting something. So that's kind of why it was so important. And I think as I got older, like sort of I got to 16 years old and I was consuming like everything I could get my hands on. But then Tarantino kind of came into the picture and I was like, yeah, I'm a film buff, man. I like movies, man. Have you seen Pulp Fiction? No, you probably haven't. Just thank God that era kind of died a death. And I said for a long time that Pulp Fiction was my favorite just because of the impact it had on me when I was 16. And this is something I'll kind of come on to later, spoiler alert, but it still kind of does. But it was during COVID where I found I was revisiting a lot of stuff in lockdown that I'd watched years ago, or perhaps I've really liked when I was really getting into my movies.
Yeah.
And then Jaws kind of came back into that discussion. I hadn't seen it for a while. And then I kind of had a sort of epiphany. I was like, wait a second, Jaws is my favorite film, and it has been this whole time. And I haven't really appreciated it because, doing the math, as it were, like I remembered that, oh yeah, this is kind of where everything sort of started for me. Yeah. And watching it again after so many years, I still loved it that much, and really appreciating the production side as well, where I was like, oh yeah, this is like brilliant. This is my favorite. If Steven Spielberg was ever to walk into my flat for us to use the phone or whatever, the first thing I'd say is, oh my God, thank you so much for making Jaws, because that literally changed my life. Because I've heard people describe the great American novel, they sort of say like Great Gatsby or Huckleberry Finn. Jaws is a contender for the great American movie, I think. Just because, it's set in the 4th of July, but it's just that sort of really easy, simple premise of man versus beast, which, Moby Dick kind of did that as well. So, a bit of a connection there. But yeah, it's just beautifully made. In a post Fableman's world, the horizon is always near the top in every shot, which is kind of funny. And it's just incredible. Steven Spielberg was 26 when he made that.
Bloody hell! I need to get my act together. I'm 26. Good God, I absolutely love Jaws. I'm going to be honest. I haven't seen it in years, but I remember, like you said, the more times you watch it, the more you pick up on stuff, whether it's intentional or like stuff in the background. But I just want to go back to the thing you said a minute ago, which is, and I can totally agree with you on this, is the fact that like my taste has completely changed from when it was at like when I was studying media and film at college. My top favourites probably would have been the stereotypical ones like your Pulp Fiction, your Fight Club, your Shawshanks. And even though those films are still incredible and I still love them, I'm so glad that I've gone back and revisited films that I maybe didn't give much of a thought to on initial viewing. Because if you'd asked secondary school me, what did you think of the original Alien? I would have said it's boring and slow, and I wasn't a fan of it. Now
Oh,
it's one of my favourite films of all time. Because I had that hindsight to go, hang on, I've grown up a bit. My taste has evolved. I'm going to revisit it, and I think it was the lead up to Covenant, where I rewatched a lot of the older ones, and I was like, okay, secondary school me was stupid. Alien was
yeah.
brilliant, and there's a couple of other films. I mean, there's some films that have kind of stood the test of time and will constantly be favorites for me. The one that always sticks in my head is The Emperor's New Groove. Like, that was my favorite animated
Yeah.
film as a kid. Still is hilarious to watch to this day, and that's going to be a constant regardless. Similar to you with Jaws, but there are always I always love the fact that like people's tastes will evolve. There are some people who will always stick to those film bro picks as they're called, uh, even
Yeah.
though they are great. But yeah, if your taste in film, and this even applies to music and books or any other form of art, if your taste doesn't evolve over time, then I was going to say there's something wrong with you, but that's not very nice. That's kind of the beauty of growing older in the art form is that like your favorite albums might change, your favorite books might change, your favorite TV shows might change. That's the beauty of these things we call art.
Yeah, and it's shaped by so many things. It's either a case of you watch or listen or read something that just happened to fall on your desk at the right time, and you just, okay, fine, I'll pick it
Yeah.
up. And suddenly you get a taste for this whole genre or artist or whatever, and then you just suddenly dive into the rest of it. Or life experiences can shape it, like
Mm.
sort of weirdly rewatching things like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind for the first time in years, with
Yeah.
sort of kind of the hindsight of being an adult and stuff. That was really bizarre to kind of be hit with that. Whoa, hang on.
Mm.
And even like Kramer versus Kramer, we revisited the other day. And like, when I was younger, my parents got divorced. And I think watching it back then, I sort of didn't really understand the kind of the scope of kind of the drama with that. But obviously now with the benefit of hindsight, I'm like, oh my God, yeah, from the adult's perspective, like I feel this way about it and so on and so forth. Yeah, it's super
Mm.
interesting to reevaluate stuff after. I've loved it when I've watched something I hated when I was a kid or when I was
Mm.
a teenager, but I really love now. The
Yeah.
example being The Exorcist
Mm.
was a really strange one because when I first saw that, it was in the middle of summer and I watched it in like the middle of the day with like the windows open and stuff, and I was like, oh, this is unintentionally hilarious. Look at me, I don't like The Exorcist. In like December of 2021 or two, where it was really misty and cold and dark outside, I switched on The Exorcist again, and I was like,
Mm.
"Oh my God, this is so shit terrifying. Why did
Mm.
I like?" There's another podcast I like where this guy is talking about his mum, who
Yeah.
The Exorcist is evil. It's an evil film. It has an evil aura, and it's like, oh yeah, I get it. It so does. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, funnily enough, The Exorcist is another one I need to rewatch because the last time I saw that, and I think the only time I've ever seen it, was when we were shown it at college,
Hmm.
and that sort of environment just isn't gonna. You're just there with your classmates in a dark classroom watching The Exorcist, and then half the students aren't taking it seriously because it's old and dated, and it's just like I need to rewatch that because unfortunately that's all I think of when
Yeah.
I think of The Exorcist. There were some scenes that did still do what they were supposed to do when I was watching it, but I'm just like I need to watch this on my own in the right setting. This is just not doing it.
Yeah. Just wait for the weather to be right, turn the lights off, switch it on, and
Mm.
yeah. The interesting thing about working in programming is that I've definitely found I've been a lot more open to going places I just didn't think would be of interest to me anyway, or just
Yeah.
kind of listening to as many recommendations as I can. The
Mm.
Cassavetes example being one of them. It's because my good friend from New York, not my good friend, my cousin from New York said, "Oh
Mm.
yeah, Cassavetes is one to look out for." Um, and sort of hearing stories about On the Silver Globe, which is this Polish science fiction film that was unfinished,
Yeah.
which I have on Blu-ray, but I haven't had a second to watch it yet. But yeah,
Mm.
I'm more willing to sort of branch out and just grab stuff from like the furthest corners of space, as it were,
Mm.
because it's always fun to discover new things. And then if you find a real sort of gem, a diamond in the rough, you're like, oh my God, I need to tell everyone about this. This is great. I need to spread the good word. Yeah. Oh, it's a
Yeah.
fun medium. Movies are awesome.
Yeah, and I think that kind of comes with the whole growing up, tastes evolving. If your taste evolves, you're going to want to try new things. Because, again, if you'd asked like secondary school, college me if I was that into horror films, I'd seen a couple, but it wasn't my favorite genre. And even though it's not my favorite genre anymore, because I'm more open to trying new things, I wouldn't have done things like recently I did Fright Fest. Like I watched a load of films for that and covered it. I wouldn't have done that like 7, 8 years ago, but I did it. So I now want to go to the complete other end of the spectrum. What is the worst film you've seen? Or I know you've got a few lined up here. So what are some of the worst films?
It's a difficult question to answer because I've seen so much,
Mm,
and sometimes I feel on Letterboxd I'm not harsh enough on things I don't like. I'll
mm,
always kind of like say, "Oh yeah, but I like this about it," even though otherwise I hated the damn thing.
yeah,
So yeah, I think there are a couple of contenders. I will start by saying a film that made me genuinely angry
go
because of how
on.
much I hated it was Brexit: The Uncivil War, which
Okay.
is a really random choice, but I'm sure you can put two and two together as to why I didn't like it and why
Yeah,
it made me angry.
yeah.
Because it was just way too fresh in my mind to have even sat down to watch it. The aforementioned Haunting in Venice is
Mm,
definitely the most recent one that I've actively disliked.
mm.
Charlie is a huge Agatha Christie fan, so it really upset her when we watched it. So I'm almost tempted to write to Kenneth Branagh and said, "You upset my partner with your stupid movie." Um, the problem with Haunting in Venice, it kind of has this attitude that, oh, as long as there are jump scares and everything else doesn't matter, the source material doesn't matter, Poirot doesn't really matter,
Yeah.
and they just kind of ran with that. And a good jump scare or a few good jump scares doesn't automatically make it a good movie. It just means it
Mm,
has jump scares. And actually, there's a school of thought that jump scares are really lazy, a really lazy way to scare people. When
yeah.
actually looking at stuff like, oh god, True Detective season 1, where that
Yeah.
scares you in a completely different way, even though there's a
Yeah.
similar kind of supernatural question mark evil.
Mm,
Um, the dialogue in Haunting in Venice was also terrible. Okay, so with whodunits, yeah, you're going to sit down, you're going to interrogate characters, and they're going to do the obligatory, this is my backstory, or like a fraction of my backstory. Perhaps backstories will come up every single like character introduction. They just launch into these nonsensical monologues talking about
mm,
their lives and just these exposition dumps, and it's just so overloading, and a
mm.
lot of it doesn't really matter in the end. So
Yeah.
it was just not terribly well written at all. I think, as I said, not long after that, we went to go see David Suchet do a talk about his career, and he was talking about how he prepared for the role of Poirot and such. Like, it was a very actor way of going about it, but
Yeah.
he wrote down literally every single thing he could think about this character and how and every single thing would probably factor into his performance in some way. There's no way that Kenneth Branagh put this much effort into doing that, and
No.
part of me wonders if he was sort of rushed to complete this because now it's owned by Disney, and his end game is to kind of
Mm,
build a Christie sort of franchise, which admittedly, like, it's good because it will
mm.
sell. What I found is Agatha Christie is the easiest thing to sell in the world
Yeah.
in terms of films, in terms of shows,
Yeah.
just because of where I work. Um, I think if the product is this kind of dishonorable to the source material and this kind of bland and
Yeah.
Disneyism sort of creeping in, then forget it. I'm
Yeah.
not interested. Yeah, that
I
was an instant 1 star for me.
I I totally get what you mean because the only one of that trilogy I've seen is the Murder on the Orient Express, which I thought was fine for what it was, but I could definitely tell, especially having seen some of the David Suchet ones growing up as a kid,
Mhm.
I'm like, this seems like it's just going through the motions of like, right, this is an Agatha Christie thing. We got to have this, tick this box, tick that box. Whereas the David Suchet ones always felt like there was genuine like thought and passion behind it. And going off of the last thing you just said, the first thing that came to my brain was like when an episode of Doctor Who does Agatha Christie more respectfully than a
I
Disney
know, I
film.
know, literally, literally. Oh my God. And the thing is, there's kind of a new breed of whodunits on the horizon, as it were, because now Ryan
Mm,
Johnson is doing the Benoit Blanc series, and
yeah,
Zoe Kravitz has just directed
Blink
something I've
Twice.
heard described as a poor man's Glass Onion, which I thought was kind of funny. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think obviously people are telling those kinds of stories in better
Mm,
ways. Yeah, I mean, hell, look at the
mm,
Batman. That's like a detective
yeah.
story, and like although it's not quite the same genre or playing field as Agatha Christie. Look at how they did that.
Mm,
Yeah, that was a
yeah.
real reach there. But so Haunting of Venice is one. I will just quickly throw out another one.
Hmm.
'Cause I was flicking through Letterboxd reviews that I've made of ones that have been really bad.
Yeah.
I remembered that Venom exists.
Okay.
That's definitely another contender for sure.
Mm,
But my problem with the dialogue in that one is
it's
it
crap.
has, I like to sort of, yeah,
It's
basically.
crap.
There's sort of what I call tennis dialogue, and
Yeah.
not in a cool challenges sort of way. It
Yeah.
seems like whenever two characters enter a scene, it's like The Room, where you know
Mm,
how someone will enter a scene in the room and they'll go, "Oh hi, character. Oh
yeah.
hi." Venom is a lot like that. And
Yeah.
then, do you want to know, like, if I was ever to teach a screenwriting class, I would say to my students, "This is the one line that you can never include in your script on pain of like getting fired."
Mm,
Something along the lines of, I know things have been hard for you lately because X.
mm.
That's my least favorite line of dialogue in any screenplay ever written. If it's there, then I'm instantly like, done, and I'll walk away. And I think Venom has a lot of that in every other scene, and it
I,
drives me crazy.
as soon as you mentioned that, I've immediately thought of like a million really bad like examples from films where it's like, I know you're mad because of, and then proceeds to expo dump why they're mad, even though we've seen it play out. Oh God, I'm just thinking of a million examples now.
And it just seems like, and then beyond that, it just Venom is kind of, there's a lot of discourse about superhero cinema at the moment
Mm,
because I think I've got very, very, very complicated feelings about the Marvel Cinematic Universe at the moment and
mm,
superhero films in general. I do think that James Cameron's first comments saying we're all going to get Avengers fatigue one day have kind of been proven right, I
yeah,
would argue. Not to say that, again, very complicated feelings, but I
yeah.
feel like Venom is kind of an example of the worst of the genre,
Mm,
where like the act structure is so cookie cutter, you can literally see the plot beats coming from a mile away,
yeah.
and just uninspiring action. The CGI is way too much,
Mm,
and it just looks like it's there to make a paycheck. I think
yeah, yeah.
just
Have
as
you?
a product, I just sort of look at it and I go, oh yeah, I can see like dirt in this like quite clearly. Just
Yeah. Have you seen? Did you end up seeing Madam Web earlier this year?
no, I didn't. Honestly, like we laughed ourselves so hard about that with the line in the trailer about the spiders.
Yeah.
The Amazon, however the bloody line, and it doesn't. They cut it out. I reckon they probably saw that people were talking about. It. They went, "Yeah, we're gonna cut
Yeah.
this." Completely.
So I feel as much. I'm not a massive fan of Venom, but like I can see the potential in it and what it could have been. Whereas with Madam Web, it's everything the recent Sony Marvel films are like trying to avoid, but unfortunately, Madam Web does everything wrong. The other ones, like at least even Morbius, I can find things to like about it. Whereas Madam Web, I wanted to give it the benefit of the doubt, but then it fits in multiple examples of that thing you said, where it's like, I know you're mad because of thing. There's like at least three examples of that sort of dialogue. The action is not great, and the ADR in the film is horrendous. I don't know if you've seen any like memes about it, but it will
Yeah,
deliberately cut away from a person's mouth because they didn't record the line on the day, so they have to like awkwardly like shove it in post, and the film is just littered with them. Again, I wanted to give the film the benefit of the doubt, but when I watched it, I was like, no, this is just this is just so bad.
it's a real hard sell for us. I think that's definitely been like the worst sort of spillover effect from what the
Mm,
MCU accomplished is that everyone is trying to play catch up, but they're rushing things as a result. So
yeah.
yeah, there were probably a few $1,000 like
Mm,
because of that screw up, probably because they were on tight deadlines. There's like, we have
Yeah.
to get this done. It doesn't. The we'll fix it in post attitude probably came
Oh
up a
yeah.
lot,
Yeah.
and that's such a shame. We shouldn't be living in an era of kind of where movies have turned out like fast food.
So one of the last questions I want to ask, and this is a nice one. I say this every time. This is a nice one that I just like asking everybody because I like how varied the answers can be. And that is, if you were stranded on a desert island, what five films would you choose to have with you, and why are you choosing them?
Hmm. I've definitely said on a couple of occasions that when we were talking about other things that they probably return again, and
Yeah.
it's during this particular question. So the first film I take with me on a desert island is the aforementioned Jaws for
Hmm.
every reason that I laid out as to why I love that film. Because yep, I can revisit it. I can never get bored of watching it. Film number two is Almost Famous.
I am so glad you picked that. No one has picked that so far, and I adore that film. I'm
Oh
so
God.
glad someone's finally picked it.
So Almost Famous came to me at a very, very specific time in my life. We've spoken a lot about how our tastes change and life experiences change.
Yep.
During lockdown number two, Electric Boogaloo, I think it was, uh, where I needed to find something else to keep me sort of busy.
Yeah.
Music has never been a huge, was never a huge drive in my life. I had a couple of favorite bands, Pink Floyd being one of them, Gorillaz
Mm.
being another. But something switched in my brain that made me really, 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 in a similar way to my dad, music is a huge drive in his life. He's quite good at seeking out random stuff. I just suddenly had this explosion of like a love of music across all decades, all genres.
Yeah.
You know, it was almost like I was catching up on 25 years worth of like musical interest development, as it were, overnight.
Yeah.
And as such, I was looking for music related films to, obviously, because film definitely took a back seat for a while when I was really getting into my music. I was more interested
Mm.
in music actually, so I missed out. And the thing, I think it was a lockdown thing, is just that it was quite hard to find new stuff to watch anyway, just because cinemas weren't open and I didn't have X streaming services or whatever.
Yep.
So Almost Famous naturally came on my radar, and yeah, it just because it came on at that very specific time, it really sort of helped kind of shepherd in new bands I discovered through the soundtrack, and I love the era that it was depicting. I just love it as a film on its own merit, the music
Yep.
aside, because I love the characters in it. I love how it's written. I love Cameron Crowe's direction. I love the performances, especially like Philip Seymour Hoffman as Lester Bangs.
Mm.
In fact, yeah, I think one of the big takeaways is getting into an semblance of artists because of how they
Mm.
appeared on the soundtracks are Almost Famous. One of my favorite exchanges at the moment is when Lester Bangs says, "You like Lou Reed?" The early stuff, in his early stuff, he's just trying to be Bowie. He should just be himself. Because I've suddenly become a big Lou Reed fan. I'm just
Mm.
like, oh yeah, I get it. That completely makes sense now. Um, yeah, I could just revisit Almost Famous over and over and over again for all the reasons listed. The soundtrack again, I keep bringing it up, but just it's so
Yep.
good.
Yep.
And yeah, I think that it just that kind of forms my
Mm.
attachment to music through my attachment to film, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. To be honest, again, it's another film I've not watched in ages, but it's one of those films where I love it as a whole, but there are specific scenes like and specific exchanges in dialogue where they're just going to be burned in my head forever. Like specifically the whole bit from where I can't remember Billy Crudup's character's name, but the whole bit where he's on drugs on the roof.
Russell Hammond.
Yeah, all that from there all the way up to the Tiny Dancer bit on the bus. Like that whole bit is just like etched in my head because it is just so perfectly well done in
I
every
probably
single.
wouldn't, I probably wouldn't have bought Madman Across the Water if it hadn't have been
Mm,
Almost Famous, which like I love early Elton John now because
mm,
of Tiny Dancer, and even Memories is a Mad Hatters as well, which is when Penny tries to join the band in New York and then she kind of gets
yeah,
kicked out of the restaurant. Oh,
yeah.
devastating. But yeah, no, that is true. The bit with Russell on the roof is always good.
I'm on drugs.
Well, they wrote Russell with Brad Pitt in mind in the first place,
I
because that's why the line is when he goes, "I am a golden god," because they wrote it with the mindset that blonde-haired Brad Pitt was going to play Russell.
I can kind of see that working actually. Like, unfortunately, Billy Crudup, like, I can just only see him in that role, but I can kind of see an alternate universe with him.
Mm.
Yeah, no, I can see that working.
Jeff
What?
Ruby is a hard character to take seriously because
Hmm.
he's voiced by Jason Lee, and I just know it's Syndrome.
I expect him to just go, Alvin!
Yeah, and there's that as well. Oh my god, the opening song of Almost Famous is the Chipmunks like Christmas song.
Yeah,
So
yeah. We're
is that a
finding weird,
coincidence?
yeah, we're finding weird ways to connect.
Yeah.
But
It's so sorry to interrupt. It's so funny because learning a lot about. So you know what Cameron Crowe used to do for a living before he became a filmmaker?
no,
Oh boy, you better sit down for this. Crowe was a journalist for Rolling Stone when he was a teenager. So
that makes so much sense. That
what
makes.
Will Miller he's based on him. So Cameron
Mm,
Crowe toured with Lynyrd Skynyrd, Led Zeppelin. I'm reading a book about David Bowie at the moment when David
yeah.
Bowie was serious into his cocaine addiction, and
Mm,
he was one of like maybe 8 people that got to see him one year because he
mm,
got an interview and he wrote about how David Bowie thought that somebody was falling out of a window all the time, like going past it. Just yeah, crazy stuff. Um,
wow.
but Stillwater is based on the Allman Brothers Band, who
Mm,
Cameron Crowe toured with as a journalist, like writing for Rolling Stone under Ben Fong Torres, who's the editor. He's a real person.
mm,
And there's a documentary about him on Netflix because that guy is just so cool because of the experiences that he's had
mm,
running Rolling Stone magazine. But Cameron Crowe basically got to know, I can't remember which Allman brother,
yeah.
because one of the Allman brothers died in a motorcycle accident,
Yeah.
and he got talking to the brother that was left, and they had a kind of a deep, meaningful conversation about all of that.
Mm,
And then when Cameron Crowe went to publish the interview, the Allman brother actually blocked it because he was like, no, 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 I can't let that go out. I'm too
yeah.
vulnerable, too much. And that obviously informed the plot point in Almost Famous, where Russell stops the publication of the Rolling Stones story to
Yeah.
protect their image. So it's even more interesting when you watch it, knowing that a lot
Mm,
of it amalgamated from experiences that Cameron Crowe has had. In that
mm,
respect, it's his most personal project.
yeah. I
Yeah.
honestly never knew that, but now that you've told me that, I'm thinking to instances in the film where I'm like, yeah, that all makes a bit more sense now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
Uh,
what are your remaining three picks?
the film number 3 is Alien, which we've also briefly touched upon.
Yep.
The best way I can describe Alien, and again, this is in my Letterboxd review, is often imitated, never beaten.
Yep.
Like, how do you top haunted house film on a spaceship that's executed with such a brilliant original
Yep.
aesthetic that many have tried to replicate, but it's never like corridors of 1970s spacecraft have never looked as gritty as they do in Alien, like the
Yep.
old computers, just which is something that Prometheus really, really got wrong by making everything look too futuristic,
Yeah.
not as cool, as it were.
I do love Prometheus, but there was one thing I saw in a Ridley Scott interview. The interviews from like 2013, 2014, but it explains a bit more about that because I that always griped me as well. I was like, if this is set before Alien, how comes everything looks way more technologically advanced? And he makes a good point, and I don't know if this is him just trying to find an excuse because it's Ridley.
Cannon plaster.
Yeah, is that the reason it looks more technologically advanced is because the people on the Prometheus are rich, so they can afford the more technologically advanced stuff, as opposed to the almost truckers in space sort of thing that we had with the original, where they're kind of the bottom of the barrel, so they're gonna have the more rundown, broken, cheap, expense.
I guess so. Yeah, that completely makes sense. And I
Yeah,
guess that's the other fun thing about Alien is that the characters are all sort of everymen. They're truckers
mm,
in space. Like,
yeah,
I love how in the opening scenes when they wake up, they're griping about bonuses and sort of the
yeah,
corporate hierarchy and sort of what's in their contract and stuff like that. There's something so
mm,
unique and down to earth 70s kind of realism about it, even though
yeah,
it's set in space.
yeah,
I love the Lovecraftian elements of Alien, how
mm-hmm,
we don't need an explanation of where the xenomorphs come from. Let's be
yeah,
honest. I think Alien Romulus has kind of gone with this line of thought to some degree.
yeah,
But honestly, I don't want to know how the derelict spacecraft got there. I don't want to know what the thing is in the chair.
Yeah.
The fear of the unknown is kind of the scary thing about it, is
Mm,
whatever it is they've stumbled upon, it probably happened hundreds of millions of years ago. There's
yeah.
no way they can ever really find out. Like, God knows, like the egg chamber looks enormous. When
Mm,
Kane is going down, you can literally see the corridor snaking around a corner, and you're like, how many eggs are there in here? What the
mm,
hell is going on? So good. And then that's before the alien even gets on the ship. Like,
yeah.
I don't really know how much time I want to devote to the chest burster scene because it's
Mm,
just so good. Like, there's something so visceral and like the
yeah.
psychosexual element, which is what they're going for,
Yeah.
which they leaned into very hard in Alien Romulus, which is one of the few things I liked about that movie. But I'm going to
Mm,
close that box for now. Um, and yep, just the design of the
mm,
creature is so unique and
yeah.
scary, even scarier still that you can kind of see that there's a skull inside of the dome of the
Mm,
head. So
yeah.
although it doesn't have eyes, you can still kind of see in a
Yeah.
semblance. And I think it's a shame they kind of lost that look in later
Mm,
films because the James Cameronization of the Alien canon, as it were.
mm,
Um, I love revisiting Alien just because I find it extremely entertaining to watch. I like how it makes me feel, how it's just this like when Ripley is trying to get off the Stromer when it's about to blow up, I find myself
yeah.
breaking out in a cold sweat. And
Mm,
I always feel like I just want to get up off my sofa and start like running as well. Just yeah. And there's a nostalgic element to it because it was the first 18 rated film I ever watched. So
mm,
for similar kind of reasons to Jaws, is that it will always be a constant because it
mm,
really opened up my imagination for sci-fi storytelling, for genre fiction, and for
mm.
cosmic horror, which is a subgenre I just really enjoy anyway.
So what's your fourth pick?
That would be, I'm going to say it in the proper dialect, The Departed.
The Departed.
Yeah.
fucking firefighters.
Yeah. um, again, like Jaws and like Alien, sort of a
Mm,
nostalgic, constant element to it. I watched it with my mum, of all people, strangely, because it'd been on
okay.
our DVD shelf for months and years, actually.
Mm,
And I guess we just decided to pick it up and give it a go. And it's one of those oh shit movies, if that
yeah.
makes sense, where just every major development that happens blows my mind and just makes me like go, oh my god, every time I see it happen. I'd rather we didn't go into spoiler territory here for those who haven't
That's
seen it,
absolute. Yeah, that's fine.
but oh my god, yeah.
Mm,
And I just love I like kinetic films where
mm,
they're edited or written in a certain way that it almost feels like a kind of a graph or sort of a maze, as it were, kind of in the path that it's following, if that makes sense.
yeah.
Arted is one such example.
Mm,
I think Scorsese wore a lot of his influences on his sleeve for that one, like especially after watching The Third Man and seeing how
yeah.
there's very similar shots in The Third Man than there is in The Departed, which is
Mm,
fine. It's not sort of on a Tarantino kind of degree, which is something I'm going to come to in a minute.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's still my favorite Scorsese. I also like the music. I think it's
Mm,
DiCaprio's best performance because his kind of paranoia and just his like literally he could probably collapse at any moment from the stress that he's under. I just
yeah.
really love that. I think it's very easy to do an undercover cop story and have them like play it really cool and like they managed to get a girlfriend on the side even throughout all of this, which I guess
Yeah.
Leo kind of does. But the fact that you can really feel Leo's fear that any minute now his cover's going to be blown and he is
Yeah.
completely screwed because Jack Nicholson is such a psycho and
Yeah.
he gets a lot of flack for The Departed because people think he overdoes it a little bit, but
Mm,
I don't really think so.
yeah.
And it's how he wants to play it, and I think it tracks because Frank Costello is a coked up nut job. So
Mm,
as far as I could say, yeah, that means he can go as wild and as zany as he likes with that performance. I think he's a very compelling villain.
mm,
Um, Matt Damon is good when he needs to be saved from Mars or when he's,
mm,
running around as Jason Bourne or whatever. But bullshit artist Matt Damon is so
mm,
good.
yeah.
Where like he's such a. Oh, I remember when. Oh god. Actually, no, I can't because spoiler territory.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, I watch it and I always find something new about it each time. I love to revisit
Mm.
it. Incredibly entertaining, incredibly gripping. Favorite Scorsese? Yeah, I think I'd probably take it onto that desert island as well.
So when it comes to like choosing a favorite Scorsese, it's always a very tight one for me between this and The Wolf of Wall Street for kind of the same reasons because I feel like The Wolf of Wall Street is way more energetic than this film, but I feel like they both have a similar sense of like there's always something happening right from one thing to the next.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's why I love them as much as I do. Like, don't get me wrong, I love Killers of the Flower Moon. I love some of his more slower burn 3 hour, films, for completely different reasons. But when Scorsese goes for something that's fast paced, there's constantly something happening, like with these two films, or even After Hours, for an example.
Mm.
I prefer Scorsese when he's doing something along those lines, and I feel like those are probably the two best examples of him doing that. I have gone again. This is another example of a film I've not watched in ages, but I want to go and rewatch The Departed, and then watch Infernal Affairs, which is is it Korean or Japanese?
It's Chinese.
I knew it was some. I knew it was one of them. I do want to rewatch The Departed and then watch Infernal Affairs just to see how they compare. Not necessarily in terms of their similarities, but just to see what elements he kept from that original and implemented. Because I know he changed a few bits, and obviously considering the setting and the people. Um, but that's something I've always intended to do, just to see what those comparisons are.
Yeah, I do need to get on Infernal Affairs. I haven't watched it, embarrassingly. I've dived into a couple of Reddit threads that very much operate on a school of thought that no, Infernal Affairs is superior. The Departed is bad because it's a remake just by default. Um, what's really interesting is everywhere
Mm.
I go, everyone has a problem with the CGI rat at the end that appears on the balcony. Everyone hates that, but I've never had a problem with it. I think it's fine.
Yeah, I've never had an issue with it.
I know it's very obvious and it's a bit on the nose, and maybe if I watched it now, I'd feel a bit differently about it. But I've never. People get really bent out of shape about that one, and I do find it quite amusing.
Yeah, I've never had a problem with it. It's just like if it works, it works, and for the sake of that, I think it's fine.
Yeah. Number five, this is the last one.
Yeah,
There's a bit of umming and ahhing about this, but I've gone with Pulp Fiction.
yeah.
So I think I said earlier, when I turned 16, I think that was when the Tarantino honeymoon period kind of came in, which probably lasted for a bit longer than it should have done. I
Mm,
think his films are very good at and this is a good thing, not so much a bad thing, but they're very good at kind of imprinting on quite impressionable young film buffs because they're
yeah,
so out there and they're so engaging in how they're written and the style is so
in your face. Yeah.
yeah, and a bit like Scorsese in The Departed. Tarantino does delve a lot into his influences, and that's definitely the best lesson I learned from him, and I still carry it
Mm,
today. It's always embrace your influences. Don't be afraid to borrow. Talent borrows, genius steals. I'm very
yeah.
fond of that phrase. And it's kind of weird because over the years, because tastes have changed and personal feelings have changed, like I found myself really, really, really going off Quentin Tarantino to the
Mm,
point where Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is like my biggest cinematic disappointment ever.
mm,
That should be made for me because it's set in an era I'm interested in.
yeah.
It's on a subject I'm interested in. But God, I hate Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. The novelization is worse. Like
Mm,
something that Tarantino can't do is write books, I must admit. Um, so and yeah, and I think sort of due to that and a combination of other things, I really struggled to revisit things like Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs. But
mm,
not that long ago, I did, and I sat back thinking, actually, I'm really glad I looked at this again because
mm,
somehow Pulp Fiction feels more fresh and original than anything he's written or directed since. Like even
yeah.
more so than Inglourious Bastards or Django.
Mm,
It takes a lot to say that. It's almost like reached his peak in the 90s and he couldn't really survive beyond that. I think
yeah.
he had some real flourishes of genius in the 2000s, like Kill Bill Volume 2, I think being the most interesting one because the climax of that is so dramatic. It's not
Mm,
like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood where it's a big bloody shootout or fight or
yeah.
anything like that, which is probably how we play it now. But actually,
Mm,
you've got Bride and Bill talking and like discussing things.
mm,
That's a tangent. That's a video for another day. Yeah, I feel like despite how I may feel about Tarantino now, I don't think my view on Pulp Fiction has actually changed all
mm,
that much. I think I still respect it for it doesn't change the fact it influenced me a lot when I was
yeah.
16 and it's incredibly entertaining and fun to watch.
I mean, I will admit, the more we've talked about Pulp Fiction, the more I feel like your comment on Alien very heavily applies to Pulp Fiction. It's been imitated multiple times, but it's very rarely been bettered.
Yeah,
Especially that whole thing of this was like a boom in the late 90s into the 2000s. It's like as soon as Pulp Fiction did what it did, everyone tried to do their own non-linear multi-story thing. Some films did it very well. Examples have escaped me, but there are some good examples out there. But there are a lot of imitators, especially within that like indie film scene in like the late 90s and early 2000s, where it's like you're just trying to be Pulp Fiction. You're not as good as it, but I can see that what you're trying to do. Which could be for a good thing or be for a bad thing. It used to be
mm,
my favorite. Unfortunately, Inglorious Bastards has been my favorite ever since I've seen it. Because I just feel like, again, I love Pulp Fiction, but I feel like for me, Inglorious Bastards is like the perfect accompaniment of everything he's known for and does without going too far, which I feel like he kind of overstepped the mark in the next couple of films he did, like Django, just goes a bit too far in places.
yeah, yeah.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, even though that's improved for me the more I've rewatched it. When I first watched it, I wasn't that big on it, but then I watched it a couple more times. I think I saw it again in cinemas the same week, and that second viewing, I was like, I get what each of these things are trying to do. But even then, I still think there are certain elements in that film where it just goes a bit too far. Whereas Inglorious Bastards is like the perfect accompaniment of
Yeah.
everything he can do. So the last question I'm just going to end on one. This is like a quick fire one just to end things on. Are there any films coming out in the next few months that you're particularly excited for that come to the top of your head?
Ooh, I think The Substance being one of them, which I mentioned earlier.
That got a lot of good reviews at Fright Fest. I didn't go to any of the in-person screenings, but I know one person who did go, and apparently there were some people that were gagging because of how disgusting it is. And I just love that. And that's the packed Odeon screening in Leicester Square in London.
Oh man. Um, I guess off the top of my head, please excuse me, I have just had to Google it because I just
That's
want.
all right.
There's an Iranian film called The Seed of the Sacred Fig, which has been
Okay.
doing rounds at some film festivals, and it got a special award at Cannes.
Hmm.
It's kind of a political film, sort of criticizing the regime in Iran, and the filmmaker is a guy called Mohammed Rasulov. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Forgive me if I'm not. Um, but he actually has a warrant out for his arrest in his own country because he made this movie.
Oh, blimey.
So in that respect, I find it extremely interesting. One of the actors literally couldn't attend the Cannes Film Festival to talk about it.
Hmm.
It's about a judge in a court, and his gun suddenly disappears, and he
Hmm.
can't really figure out who took it. And it's sort of this drama about him trying to kind of unravel this mystery as to where his gun has gone. Is somebody trying to get him,
Yeah.
or whatever, whatever, whatever. I think that's definitely the one I'm most interested in because I haven't
Hmm.
seen an Iranian film before in my entire life.
Hmm.
This one has definitely inspired me just by kind of the overall premise that I know about it and kind of the sort of political connotations behind the making of it and sort
Yeah.
of the award that the filmmaker got a special award at Cannes because of everything that's happened.
Yeah.
I think it says a lot about films with a political angle and also
Hmm.
about ideas of freedom of speech on this level. Like literally, imagine if somebody made something in the UK that was banned or a
Yeah.
director got arrested because it dared to say like, imagine if the Tory government were basically banning filmmakers from saying stuff that sort of
Yeah.
criticize the current state of things. We
Yeah.
can't. That's just something I find very
Hmm.
interesting.
Is that one on wide release, or do you think it will be part of like the London Film Festival lineup?
I think it'll be London Film Festival, but it does
Hmm.
have a release date in the UK in January next year. But if it's at
Yeah.
London Film Fest, yeah, I'll definitely try and go and see that one.
Yeah, you've definitely piqued my interest because I try and whenever London Film Festival comes around, I always try and pick films that are a little bit out of my knowledge or out of my not comfort zone, but like ones that I wouldn't have necessarily have heard of. But I might make a note of that because you definitely piqued my interest on that one.
Yeah. I guess one more honorable mention on a more conventional. It's a complete unknown for sure.
Yeah.
So I'm not a Bob Dylan super fan. I have tried on a few different occasions to really, really dive in, and there's some
Mm.
parts of it I like, some parts of it I don't. This period of Dylan is very interesting. I think it seems to be doing that biopic thing where it's not trying to tell his entire life story because that would be
Yeah.
extremely hard for Bob Dylan because he's been making music for like 70 years or something stupid like that. But
Yeah.
this is when he moved away from playing straight up acoustic folk music into
Yeah.
like using electric instruments.
Yeah.
Like at one point during a show, somebody called out Judas because everyone thought that it was a betrayal of the folk scene that he was basically
Mm.
daring to sort of add these sorts of instruments. But actually, it produced some of his best work that
Yeah.
period. I think it's really interesting. We're going to be examining that. Chalamet is such a good fit for playing Bob Dylan.
Mm.
It's unreal.
Yeah.
Um, and it's interesting to see what James Mangold does, post Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Like, if he can
Mm.
get back to that sort of walk the line, Ford v Ferrari kind of angle.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I think that's another pick. London Film Fest, I don't know.
I'm hoping it's in there because there's a couple of films that I'm hoping make that lineup, and I feel like that could be one of them that takes like the Maestro slot from last year. So unfortunately, that is all we have time for. Hugh, why don't you let everyone know where they can find you on the internet? I still haven't found a easy way of saying this this sign out bit. Where can they
Um,
find you?
well, I've sort of gone ostrich mode a little bit, actually. Like, I'm not on Twitter anymore, for instance. I'm going to call it
Hmm.
Twitter. It's not called X.
It's not. No, we call it Twitter on this channel. X is.
I, I guess just my Letterboxd is the best place to find my sort of my ramblings.
Mm,
I believe my username is at Hucifer97. But if that's incorrect, I will drop you a message, Aaron, and then it could be in the thumbnail or
yeah.
something. But in the meantime, actually, just if you're ever in the neighborhood, keep an eye out for our film
Mm,
program at Trinity Theatre. If you visit our website, trinitytheatre.net, you can see what kind of stuff is coming up. And yeah, just if you come and support your local cinema if you can.
mm,
We're a charity as well as an arts venue, so we don't really receive any core funding to kind of keep ourselves afloat. And our staffing is basically we rely on the goodwill of volunteers. So there's a
mm,
real community sort of aspect to the organization that I work in, and just any kind of new audiences or new support just
mm.
means buckets to us. Yeah, we look like a massive church, but we're not a church. We used to be a church, but we're not anymore.
Yeah.
So don't be fooled. This isn't a case of a projector being balanced on a stool in a hall. We have a great sound system, great 4K projector.
Mm.
Look out for what comes out in spring 2025 because yeah, it could be the best place to look for all the award season stuff all in one go.
Yeah, as someone who's been to the Trinity Theatre, because one of my friends who's a musician performed there a good few years ago, it
Mhm.
is a lovely venue, and I cannot recommend it enough. And I can't even imagine. I still need to go and see a film there because I can't imagine how well that would look and sound in there,
Mhm.
knowing how well music is in there. But yes, if you're in the area, please go and visit Trinity Theatre, and go and support your local cinemas just in general. Just,
Yep.
just, 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 just do it.
Yeah. But for God's sake, keep your phones off throughout the entire
Yes, please, just turn your phones off. That's all we ask. Or keep them on silent in your pocket. Like, just don't touch them.
thing.
Anyway, that has been yet another episode of For the Love of Film. Thank you, Hugh, for joining me. It's been great talking with you about film. If you like the video, then give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.
Okay now.